Hello everyone, I'm Mr. Edison, and I'm here to guide you into a peaceful slumber. If you find this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to know where you're from and what time it is as you unwind. So settle in, get cozy, and let the relaxation begin. I've always been enthralled with the macabre. The darker, the better, at least as far as entertainment choices are concerned. Horror films, true crime documentaries, supernatural podcasts, I consumed them all with voracious curiosity. That being said, I had never witnessed or been part of any genuine paranormal encounter. My fascination remained safely academic, confined to the pages of books and pixels on screens. That would change dramatically in October 2023, the year I turned 27. The mountains of northern Arizona offered a welcome respite from Phoenix's lingering summer heat. My younger brother Ryan was attending a college football training camp there, and several of us had decided to make a small vacation of it. We rented a cabin in the dense pine forest just 20 minutes from the training facilities, a perfect base camp for Ryan and an ideal getaway for the rest of us. Our small group consisted of myself, Ryan, my older brother William, my boyfriend Jason, and Jason's childhood friend Vincent. The cabin itself was nothing remarkable, a two-bedroom structure with a loft, rustic kitchen, and a living area centered around a stone fireplace. What made it special was its isolation. The nearest neighbor was at least half a mile away, and the forest pressed close on all sides, transforming the windows into dark mirrors after sunset. Ryan had always been the rational one in our family, level-headed, logical, rarely given to flights of fancy, which is why his stories about experiences with a Ouija board during his freshman year had surprised me so much. He recounted them without embellishment or dramatic flair, which made them all the more unsettling. "I'm telling you," he explained. "One evening as we sat around the fireplace, there were 5 of us in the dorm lounge, and that pointer moved on its own. We all swore we weren't pushing it. But you guys were probably doing that ideomotor thing," Vincent argued, gesturing with his beer bottle. "Unconscious movements. Your brain makes your muscles do things you're not aware of." Ryan shrugged. "Maybe, but it spelled out the name of our resident assistant's deceased grandmother. None of us knew that name." "Coincidence," Vincent insisted. "All I know," Ryan continued, his voice dropping slightly, "is that weird things happened in our dorm for weeks afterward. Doors opening and closing, items disappearing and reappearing in strange places. One guy even transferred to another building. The wind outside picked up, sending a hollow moan through the chimney. The sound perfectly punctuated Ryan's story, and a moment of silence fell over our group. "We should try it," I suggested suddenly. William raised an eyebrow. "Try what? A Ouija board?" "Why not?" I sat forward, genuinely excited. "We could make one. It doesn't have to be fancy." Ryan shook his head immediately. "Count me out. I've done it once, and that was enough." "Oh, come on," Jason said, nudging Ryan's shoulder. "Don't tell me you actually believe in that stuff." "I believe that there are things we don't understand," Ryan replied carefully. "And I believe in not messing with them." "I'm with Ryan on this one," William added. Those things always gave me the creeps. But my curiosity had already taken hold. The prospect of experiencing something genuinely unexplainable thrilled me. I'd spent years immersed in horror stories. What if this was my chance to step into one? "I'm doing it," I announced, "even if I have to do it alone." I would soon regret those words more than I could possibly imagine. "You're not going to do it alone," Jason sighed, standing up from the couch. "I'll join you." Vincent, never one to miss out on anything, quickly added, "Me too. I want to prove to everyone this is nonsense." William reluctantly agreed to participate as well, though he kept glancing at Ryan, whose expression had grown increasingly concerned. "You'll need to set some rules," Ryan advised, his voice tense. "Never ask when you're going to die. Never ask about God. Never use it alone. And most importantly, you need to say goodbye properly." "What happens if we don't?" I asked, my interest piqued. Ryan's expression darkened. "You leave a door open, and things can come through." The rational part of my brain dismissed his warning as superstition, but something in his tone gave me pause. Still, my determination outweighed my caution. I began searching the cabin for materials. In the kitchen, pantry, I found a large piece of cardboard, the back of a cereal variety pack. It wasn't ideal, but it would serve my purpose. I spread it out on the dining table and used a Sharpie to create a makeshift Ouija board. I drew the alphabet in a semicircle, added numbers 0 through 9 below, and wrote yes and no in the upper corners. At the bottom, I added the word goodbye. For the planchette, the pointer that supposedly moves across the board, I cut a smaller piece of cardboard into a rough heart shape. I considered how to make it slide more smoothly and ended up wrapping it in aluminum foil from the kitchen. "This is ridiculous," Vincent scoffed, watching me work. "You really think some ghosts are going to use your arts and crafts project to communicate with us?" "It's not about the materials," Ryan interjected from his position on the couch, where he was determinedly not participating. "It's about intention. The board is just a tool." I completed my creation as darkness fell outside. Rain had begun to spatter against the windows, and occasional thunder rumbled in the distance. The sudden autumn storm created the perfect atmosphere for what we were about to attempt. We gathered around the dining table, positioning the homemade board in the center. William dimmed the lights, leaving only the soft glow from the kitchen to illuminate our faces. I placed 2 candles on either side of the board and lit them, more for ambiance than necessity. "This is how it works," I explained, positioning the makeshift planchette in the center of the board. "We each put one finger lightly on the pointer, just the tip of your index finger. Don't press down, just touch it." "And then what?" Vincent asked, still looking skeptical. "We ask questions, and if there's a spirit present, it will move the pointer to answer us." "And if the pointer doesn't move?" William asked. I shrugged. "Then Vincent gets to say I told you so, and we watch a horror movie instead." Jason smiled nervously. "Let's get this over with." The 4 of us took our places around the table. Ryan remained on the couch, watching us with unconcealed apprehension. Outside, the storm intensified, rain now drumming steadily against the roof. We each placed a fingertip on the foil-covered planchette. The moment we made contact, a particularly loud crack of thunder shook the cabin, causing all of us to jump slightly. "Perfect timing," Vincent muttered. I took a deep breath. "Is anyone there?" I asked, my voice steady despite the flutter of anticipation in my chest. "Is there a spirit who wishes to communicate with us?" For several long moments, nothing happened. The planchette remained motionless under our fingers. Vincent shot me a knowing look, his skepticism evident. But then, almost imperceptibly at first, the planchette began to move. The movement was so subtle that I initially thought I had imagined it, a slight tremor beneath my fingertip. But then it became more pronounced, a definite sliding sensation across the cardboard. "Who's doing that?" Vincent demanded, his voice tight. "Not me," William whispered. "I'm barely touching it," Jason added. The planchette continued to move, slowly at first, then with increasing confidence. It drifted toward the upper corner of the board and settled firmly on yes. A collective intake of breath circled the table. Even Vincent appeared startled. "Is anyone there?" I repeated, my heart now pounding against my ribs. Again, the planchette moved to yes. "Who are you?" I asked. The planchette began to move more deliberately now, hovering over letters in sequence, spelling out visitor. "Visitor," William echoed. "Visitor from where?" The planchette circled the board once before spelling out far. "That's conveniently vague," Vincent muttered, though his earlier smugness had faded considerably. "Are you a good spirit?" Jason asked. The planchette remained motionless for what felt like an uncomfortably long time. Then slowly it moved to yes. "They all say that," Ryan called from the couch. His voice startled me. I'd almost forgotten he was there. "Do you have a message for any of us?" I asked, ignoring my brother's comment. The planchette spelled watch. "Watch what?" William asked, tension evident in his voice. "Darkness," came the reply. As if responding to these words, the lights in the cabin flickered briefly. The storm outside had intensified, wind now howling around the eaves. "I don't like this," William said quietly. It's just the storm affecting the power, I reassured him, though I felt a distinct uneasiness spreading through my body. Let's ask something specific. Something that would prove this is real. Vincent, still the most skeptical despite his obvious discomfort, nodded. Good idea. Let me ask something only I would know. He cleared his throat. What was the name of my childhood dog when I was 5 years old? The planchette began to move immediately with purpose and precision, spelling Scout. Vincent's face drained of color. How did... He stopped, swallowing hard. That's correct. I've never mentioned Scout to any of you. Lucky guess, William suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. The heavy feeling in the room intensified. The candle flame suddenly bent sideways, though there was no draft I could detect. Ask something else, I urged, a mixture of fear and excitement coursing through me. What's our brother's name? The one who isn't here? I asked, testing the entity. William, the planchette spelled. No, William is here, I corrected. Our other brother. Ryan, it responded. I glanced at Ryan, who was now standing behind the couch, watching us intently. That was an easy one, I acknowledged. What's the name of William's fiancée? The planchette hesitated, then began to move, spelling Rebecca. Close, William said, his voice strained. It's Rebecca with 2 C's. As if hearing the correction, the planchette moved to no and then spelled Rebecca. A chill crept across my skin. The precision was unsettling. I want to stop, William suddenly announced. But he didn't remove his finger from the planchette. Just a few more questions, I pleaded, completely captivated by what was happening. The planchette suddenly jerked violently, nearly jumping off the board entirely. When it settled, it began to move again, faster than before, spelling danger. What danger? Jason asked, his voice barely audible. Opening, came the reply. What's opening? I demanded. Door, was the simple answer. At that precise moment, a tremendous gust of wind hit the cabin, and the front door flew open, slamming against the wall with a crash that made all of us jump. Cold air and rain swept into the room, extinguishing both candles simultaneously. Vincent jerked his hand away from the planchette. That's it. I'm done. In the confusion that followed, William rushing to close the door, Jason fumbling for the light switch, I lost track of the planchette. When the lights came back on, I noticed with alarm that it was still moving across the board, despite no one touching it. It came to rest on a single word. No. Nobody move, Ryan said suddenly beside the table. His face was ashen. You need to finish this properly. What's happening? William demanded, water dripping from his hair where the rain had caught him. You've made contact with something, Ryan explained, his voice tight with tension. And it doesn't want you to end the session. Vincent gave a nervous laugh. This is ridiculous. The wind blew the door open. The pointer moved because the table got bumped. Then why is it still moving? I whispered. All eyes turned to the planchette, which was indeed sliding in small, circular movements across the center of the board without any human contact. Everyone sit back down, Ryan instructed. All 4 of you need to put your fingers back on the planchette and properly close the session. I'm not touching that thing again, Vincent protested. You have to, Ryan insisted. You helped open this door. You need to help close it. Outside, the storm had reached a fevered pitch. Rain lashed against the windows like gravel, and the wind moaned through the trees with an almost human quality. The electric lights flickered again, longer this time, threatening to plunge us into darkness. Reluctantly, we resumed our positions around the table. I could feel the tension radiating from each person as we placed our fingertips back on the planchette. The moment we made contact, it began to move with purpose, spelling, not alone. What does that mean? Jason whispered. Brought others, the planchette continued. A distinct thud came from upstairs, something heavy falling. William jerked his head toward the sound. There's nobody up there, he said. Ask who these others are, Ryan urged from behind me. Who came with you? I asked, my mouth dry with fear. Hungry ones, the planchette spelled. The temperature in the room seemed to drop precipitously. My breath fogged in front of my face. I think we should say goodbye now, William suggested. his voice shaking slightly. Before anyone could respond, the planchette shot across the board to spell "Never leave." "We need to end this," Ryan insisted. "All of you move the pointer to goodbye and say it out loud together." We attempted to guide the planchette toward the word at the bottom of the board, but it resisted, as if being pulled in the opposite direction. The sensation was undeniable. Something was fighting against our collective effort. "Push harder," Ryan commanded. With considerable effort, we managed to drag the planchette to goodbye. "Now say it," Ryan instructed. "All together." "Goodbye," we chorused, our voices uneven. Nothing happened for a moment. The planchette remained motionless under our fingers. Then, without warning, it flew off the board entirely, skittering across the table and onto the floor. The candles, which William had relit, extinguished themselves simultaneously. For several seconds, no one moved or spoke. The only sound was the storm outside and our rapid breathing. "Is it over?" Jason finally asked. "I don't know," Ryan admitted. "I've never seen it respond like that." Vincent stood abruptly. "This whole thing is nonsense. You all convinced yourselves something supernatural was happening, but it was just the power of suggestion and a convenient storm. Then how do you explain it, knowing about Scout?" William challenged. "One of you must have heard me mention him before. Or maybe it was just coincidence," Vincent replied, but his confident tone had a forced quality to it. I remained seated, staring at the makeshift board. Something felt unfinished, incomplete, as if a conversation had been interrupted rather than concluded. "We should burn the board," Ryan suggested. "Just to be safe." "Now you're being ridiculous," Vincent scoffed. "It's a piece of cardboard with marker on it." "I don't care," Ryan insisted. "I've seen what happens when these things aren't handled properly." In the end, we compromised. I folded the board and the planchette and sealed them in a plastic bag, which Ryan then stored in the trunk of his car. The physical objects were removed from the cabin, but as I would soon discover, whatever we had contacted wasn't so easily dismissed. Sleep eluded me that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the planchette moving across my homemade board, spelling out warnings. The storm eventually passed, leaving an eerie stillness in its wake. The silence seemed almost worse than the howling wind, expectant, as if the forest were holding its breath, waiting. I shared a room with Jason, while William and Vincent took the second bedroom, and Ryan claimed the loft. Around 2 a.m. I finally drifted into a restless sleep, only to be jarred awake by a sound I couldn't immediately identify. Tap, tap, tap. My eyes flew open, staring into darkness. Beside me, Jason slept soundly, his breathing deep and regular. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the window, a precise, deliberate rhythm. 3 taps, pause. 3 taps, pause. I told myself it was just a branch, though I couldn't recall any trees growing close enough to touch the cabin. Pulling the blanket tighter around my shoulders, I tried to ignore it. Tap, tap, tap. The sound continued, growing slightly louder. With each sequence, my anxiety increased. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, I slipped out of bed and approached the window. The curtains were drawn, and I hesitated before reaching out to pull them aside. The tapping stopped the moment my fingers touched the fabric, as if whatever was causing it knew I was there. I yanked the curtains open, half expecting to see a face pressed against the glass. Instead, I was met with the empty darkness of the forest. No branches, no birds, nothing that could have caused the sound. As I stared into the night, my eyes adjusted to reveal the moonlit outlines of trees, and between them, a movement. Something shifting in the shadows, just at the edge of perception. Not animal, not human, but something deliberately concealing itself. I let the curtain fall back into place and retreated to the bed, my heart hammering. For the remainder of the night, I lay awake, listening. The tapping didn't resume, but something worse took its place, the distinct sensation of being watched. Morning came with a welcome brightness that seemed to banish the night's anxieties. Over breakfast, I mentioned the tapping, but no one else had heard anything unusual. Probably just the house settling after the storm, William suggested, pouring himself coffee. Or pine cones hitting the roof, Jason offered. They fall all the time up here. Only Ryan looked concerned. Did anything else happen? He asked quietly while the others were distracted. I thought I saw something moving in the trees, I admitted. But it was dark and my imagination was probably running wild. Ryan nodded slowly. Keep an eye out, and maybe we should all stay together today. The day passed uneventfully. Ryan had football training, and the rest of us hiked a nearby trail, enjoying the crisp autumn air and the spectacular fall colors. The forest seemed completely benign in daylight, a stark contrast to the menacing presence I had sensed the previous night. By evening, even I had nearly convinced myself that my experience had been nothing more than nerves and an overactive imagination influenced by our Ouija session. We returned to the cabin for dinner, and as darkness fell, Vincent suggested we watch a horror movie, an ironic choice that nonetheless helped lighten the mood. By midnight, we were all ready for bed, the previous night's uneasiness seemingly forgotten. I fell asleep quickly this time, exhausted from the hike and the previous night's insomnia. But my rest was short-lived. I jolted awake, disoriented. The room was pitch black, and for a moment, I couldn't remember where I was. Then the details rushed back. The cabin, the Ouija board, the tapping at the window. What had awakened me? I strained my ears, listening. The cabin was silent except for Jason's breathing beside me. Then I heard it, a faint scratching sound, like fingernails dragging slowly across wood. It seemed to be coming from the ceiling. I lay frozen, tracking the sound as it moved directly overhead, then across the ceiling to the far wall, down the wall, and finally to the bedroom door. The doorknob began to turn slowly, deliberately. I tried to call out to Jason, but my voice lodged in my throat. The door began to open, a sliver of deeper darkness appearing in the gap. With tremendous effort, I managed to reach out and shake Jason awake. "Someone's in the house," I whispered urgently. Jason sat up immediately, instantly alert.
"What, where?"
The door stopped moving. "The door. It was opening by itself," I said, my voice trembling. Jason reached for his phone, activating the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the door, which was firmly closed. "Are you sure?" he asked, scanning the room. "It looks closed to me. I swear it was opening." "And there was a scratching sound on the ceiling," I insisted. Jason got out of bed and checked the door, then the closet, then under the bed. "There's no one here," he assured me. "You were probably dreaming." But I knew I hadn't been dreaming. The scratching had been too distinct, the movement of the doorknob too real. "I'm going to check the rest of the cabin," Jason said, pulling on a t-shirt. I followed him, unwilling to be left alone. We checked every room, finding William and Vincent sound asleep in their room and Ryan dozing in the loft. Everything seemed normal. "See, everyone's asleep. There's no one here but us," Jason said gently. We returned to our room, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As Jason drifted back to sleep, I remained awake, watching the door. Just as dawn began to lighten the sky, I heard it again, the faint scratching sound, this time from inside the closet. Before I could react, the closet door swung open a few inches, though there was no draft to explain the movement. I closed my eyes tightly, telling myself it wasn't real. When I opened them again, the door was closed. But the scratching continued. The next morning, tension hung in the cabin like a fog. No one seemed well rested. Vincent appeared particularly haggard with dark circles under his eyes. "Bad night?" I asked him as he fumbled with the coffee maker. He glanced at me, then quickly away. "Just couldn't sleep. Kept hearing weird noises. My stomach tightened." "What kind of noises?" Vincent hesitated. "Like whispering, right outside the bedroom door. I thought it was one of you guys at first, but when I checked, there was no one there." William, emerging from the bathroom, overheard our conversation. "You heard it too?" "I thought I was losing my mind." "What did you hear?" I asked, my uneasiness growing. "Same thing, whispering, and footsteps in the hall, but every time I looked, there was nothing." Jason joined us, looking perplexed. "So everyone had a bad night?" "I thought it was just you," he said, nodding to me. Ryan was the last to come downstairs, his expression grim. "We need to talk about what's happening," he announced without preamble. "Nothing's happening," Vincent insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "Old cabins make noises. We're all just on edge because of that stupid board game." "It wasn't a game," Ryan said quietly. "And you know it." The five of us gathered around the dining table, the same table where we'd used the Ouija board. In daylight, with cups of coffee and the smell of toast in the air, it seemed absurd to be discussing supernatural phenomena. And yet the shared experiences of the night were difficult to dismiss. "Here's what I think," Ryan began. "When we used the board, we made contact with something. Something that probably shouldn't have been contacted. And because we didn't end the session properly, it's still here." "That's ridiculous," Vincent interjected, but with less certainty than before. "Is it?" Ryan challenged. "You all heard things last night. Things that can't be easily explained. So what do we do?" William asked. "Exorcism? Sage burning?" "Call a priest!" Ryan shook his head. "I'm not sure. In my experience, these things usually fade over time if you don't engage with them. But this feels different, more intentional." "We could try using the board again," I suggested. "Properly say goodbye this time." "Absolutely not," Ryan said firmly. "That would only make things worse. Give it more of a connection to us. Then we leave," Vincent decided. "Pack up and get out today." No one argued with this suggestion. Within an hour we were gathering our belongings, eager to cut our stay short by 2 days. As I was packing my suitcase, I noticed something strange, a small symbol drawn in what looked like ash on the inside of the closet door. It resembled an eye within a triangle. I hadn't seen it before, and I was certain it hadn't been there the previous day. I called Ryan to my room and showed him the marking. "Did you do this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Ryan shook his head slowly, his expression darkening. "We need to leave now." We hastened our packing, an unspoken urgency driving us. But as we were loading the cars, a peculiar lethargy began to settle over me. My limbs felt heavy, my thoughts foggy. Looking at the others, I could see they were experiencing similar effects. Movements becoming sluggish, eyes struggling to stay focused. "Does anyone else feel strange?" William asked, leaning against his car. Everyone nodded, too drained to speak. "It doesn't want us to leave," Ryan said, his voice tight with effort. "We need to fight this." With tremendous concentration, we managed to finish loading the vehicles. I climbed into Jason's car while Vincent and William took William's car. Ryan had his own. As Jason turned the key in the ignition, nothing happened. The engine didn't even attempt to turn over. "Battery's dead," he announced, trying again. In the car next to us, William was having the same issue. Only Ryan's car started successfully. "This can't be a coincidence," I said, fear clutching at my chest. Ryan approached our car. "Both batteries dead at the same time?" "No way." "We'll jump them," Vincent suggested. But even with jumper cables connected to Ryan's running car, neither vehicle would start. "This is impossible," Jason muttered, checking under the hood for any obvious problems. "We'll have to call for help," William decided, pulling out his phone. His expression immediately fell. No signal. We all checked our phones. Not one had service, despite having had perfect reception the previous days. "We'll take my car," Ryan offered. "We can all squeeze in. Leave the luggage." We abandoned the dead vehicles and piled into Ryan's small sedan. As he put it in reverse, the engine suddenly died. "No," Ryan whispered, trying the ignition again. The car remained silent. We were stranded. By mid-afternoon, we had exhausted all practical options. A hike to the nearest town would take at least 4 hours, and with darkness approaching and no guarantee of finding help, it seemed more prudent to remain at the cabin for one more night. "We'll try again in the morning," William reasoned. "Maybe whatever electrical issue affected the cars will resolve itself." No one mentioned the impossibility of 3 separate vehicles experiencing simultaneous electrical failures, or the coincidence of all our phones losing service at once. The unspoken understanding was that something beyond our control, something potentially malevolent, had trapped us here. We unloaded the essential items from the cars and returned to the cabin. The atmosphere inside had changed noticeably. The air felt heavier, the shadows deeper. Even with all the lights on, the room seemed dimmer than before. "We should stay together tonight," Ryan suggested as evening approached. "All of us in the living room." No one objected. The thought of separating, of facing the night alone in our respective rooms, was unbearable. We arranged the couch cushions and spare blankets on the living room floor. creating a makeshift communal sleeping area. The television provided background noise, a cooking show that none of us actually watched, but which filled the silence with comforting, ordinary sounds. As night fell, our conversation grew increasingly strained. We avoided discussing the strange occurrences directly, instead making forced small talk about work, sports, future plans, anything to maintain a semblance of normalcy. Around 10 p.m., the lights flickered, then went out completely. The television died mid-sentence, plunging us into darkness and silence. "Power outage," Jason said quickly, his voice unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet. Vincent used his phone's flashlight to locate candles in the kitchen. Soon, the living room was illuminated by a half-dozen small flames, casting elongated shadows across the walls. "Everyone try to get some sleep," William suggested. "Tomorrow we'll hike out at first light." We settled into our makeshift beds, but sleep was the furthest thing from my mind. Every creak of the cabin, every whisper of wind outside, sent waves of anxiety through me. The first incident occurred around midnight. A series of loud knocks, 3 in succession, thundered through the cabin. They didn't come from the doors or windows, but seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, as if something massive were trying to enter. We all sat upright, exchanging alarmed glances. "What was that?" Vincent whispered, before anyone could respond. The knocking repeated, 3 heavy thuds that vibrated through the floor. "It's just the structure settling," Jason attempted, but his voice trembled. The knocking continued, moving around the cabin in a circular pattern. 3 knocks on the east wall, 3 on the north, 3 on the west, 3 on the south. A complete circuit. Then silence fell again, more oppressive than before. "I'm going to check outside," William announced, reaching for his phone. "Don't," Ryan warned. "That's what it wants, to separate us." "There's nothing out there," Vincent insisted, though he made no move to verify his claim. The second incident happened about an hour later. The temperature in the cabin plummeted suddenly, our breath forming visible clouds in the candlelight. The cold was unnatural, bone-deep and penetrating, impossible for an autumn night. "Something's here," Ryan whispered, his eyes scanning the shadows beyond our candle-lit circle. A sound began to emerge from the darkness, a low, rhythmic scraping, like nails dragging across wood. It started faint but grew steadily louder, circling our position just as the knocking had done. In the flickering light, I noticed something on the wall, a dark stain spreading slowly across the wooden paneling. As I watched in horror, it formed into a crude symbol, the same eye within a triangle I had found in the closet. "Look," I gasped, pointing. All eyes turned to the wall. As we watched, more symbols began to appear, forming a circle around the room, just above eye level. "What are they?" Jason asked, his voice barely audible. "Nothing good," Ryan responded grimly. The scraping sound intensified, now accompanied by a low, atonal humming that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The candle flames bent sideways, all pointing toward the center of our circle, defying the laws of physics. Vincent suddenly clutched at his chest, his eyes wide with panic. "I can't breathe," he gasped, struggling for air. William moved to help him, but froze halfway. "Something's touching me," he choked out, visibly trembling. The humming grew louder, resolving into something that almost resembled words. Indecipherable, but clearly intentional communication. "Don't listen to it," Ryan commanded, his voice cutting through the noise. "Cover your ears and close your eyes, all of you." We obeyed, huddling closer together. Through my closed eyelids, I could sense the candles growing brighter, their light intensifying to an impossible degree. The air pressurized, as if we were deep underwater or at high altitude. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The pressure released, the temperature normalized, and the humming ceased. I cautiously opened my eyes. The candles burned normally again, and the shadows had retreated to their corners. The symbols on the wall had vanished, leaving no trace. "Is it over?" Jason whispered. Ryan shook his head slowly. "No, it's just beginning." The remainder of the night passed intense vigilance. None of us slept. By dawn, we were exhausted, strung out, and desperate to escape. The morning light revealed something none of us had expected. All three cars were now parked differently than we had left them, arranged in a perfect triangle around the cabin. We didn't discuss the repositioned vehicles. Some things are too inexplicable, too terrifying to acknowledge directly. Instead, we focused on what seemed manageable, checking if any of the cars would start. Miraculously, all three roared to life without issue. "Let's go." "Now," Vincent urged, already throwing his belongings into William's car. No one argued. Within 15 minutes, we had packed and were ready to depart. As I performed a final sweep of the bedroom to ensure I hadn't forgotten anything, I noticed something on the mirror, condensation forming letters before my eyes, "Always watching." I backed out of the room without a word and hurried to the car. The drive down the mountain was tense but uneventful. Cell service returned about 20 minutes into our journey, and the feeling of oppression that had hung over us began to lift slightly. "Did that really happen?" Jason asked as we neared the interstate. "All of it?" "I don't know what it was," I replied honestly, but something happened. We parted ways at a gas station near Flagstaff, Ryan heading back to his training camp, William and Vincent returning to their shared apartment, Jason and I to our place in Phoenix. The normalcy of the gas station, people fueling cars, buying snacks, going about their ordinary lives, seemed surreal after what we had experienced. I hugged Ryan goodbye, holding on perhaps longer than necessary. "Be careful," he warned quietly. "These things don't always end when you leave the place." His words sent a chill through me, but I nodded and forced a smile. "I will." The drive home to Phoenix was silent, both Jason and I lost in our own thoughts. The familiar desert landscape was a welcome change from the dense, secretive forest, and by the time we reached our apartment, I had almost convinced myself that we could put the experience behind us. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in days, exhaustion finally overcoming anxiety, but my relief was short-lived. I began to notice small discrepancies in our apartment. Objects moved from where I'd left them. Doors I was certain I'd closed standing open, electronics turning on by themselves. Jason experienced similar phenomena, but attributed them to forgetfulness or mechanical glitches. A week after our return, I received a frantic call from William. "It followed us," he said without preamble. "Vincent and I were seeing things, hearing things. It's here." "What kind of things?" I asked, though I already knew. "Shadows moving when nothing's there. Whispering at night. And the symbols, they're appearing on our walls." My stomach dropped. "Have you told Ryan?" "He's not answering his phone. His roommate says he hasn't shown up for practice in 3 days. The implications of this hit me with physical force. We need to find him." Within hours, Jason and I were back on the road to Flagstaff. When we reached Ryan's dormitory, his roommate confirmed our fears. No one had seen Ryan since his return from the cabin. He was acting weird, the roommate told us. Jumpy. Kept saying something was watching him. We filed a missing persons report with campus security and the local police, but I knew in my heart that conventional methods wouldn't help. Whatever had happened to Ryan was beyond ordinary explanation. That evening, gathered in a hotel room with William and Vincent, I finally voiced what we had all been avoiding. We opened something with that board, something that attached itself to us, and now we need to figure out how to close it. "If Ryan couldn't figure it out, what chance do we have?" Vincent asked, his former skepticism entirely gone. "We have to try," I insisted. "For Ryan's sake, and for our own." Over the following days, we researched obsessively, consulting books on the paranormal, speaking with self-proclaimed experts, even visiting a local church to speak with a priest. The consistent advice was troubling. We needed to confront whatever entity we had contacted and formally break its connection to us. "You mean use the board again?" William realized, horror evident in his voice. "It's the only way," I confirmed. We opened a door. "Now we have to close it properly." None of us wanted to return to the cabin, so we decided to conduct the ritual in William and Vincent's apartment. I recreated the Ouija board, more carefully this time with research into the proper symbols and configurations. We gathered the necessary protective elements suggested by our sources: salt, blessed candles, religious symbols. On the night of the full moon, exactly 2 weeks after our initial contact, we sat around the board, The atmosphere was solemn, purposeful, no longer a game or an experiment, but a desperate attempt to undo what we had done. "Remember," I instructed, "no matter what happens, we must end by moving to goodbye and breaking contact." All of us together. We placed our fingers on the planchette. The candles flickered simultaneously, though there was no draft. "We wish to speak with the entity we contacted at the cabin," I stated firmly. The planchette remained still for several long moments. Then slowly it began to move, spelling, "Here." "We want to formally close our connection with you," William said, his voice steady despite his obvious fear. The planchette circled the board twice before spelling, "Not done." "What do you want from us?" Vincent asked. "One of you," came the reply. A chill pervaded the room. The implication was clear. "Where is our brother Ryan?" I demanded. "Mine now," the planchette spelled. Jason gripped my hand tightly with his free one. "We need to end this." "Not without knowing what happened to Ryan," I insisted. The planchette moved again. "Trade." "Trade what?" William asked. "One for one," was the answer. Understanding dawned with horrifying clarity. It wanted one of us in exchange for Ryan. "No deals," I stated firmly. "We're closing this connection now. You have no power here." The planchette jerked violently, nearly pulling out of our grasp, spelling, "Always power." The lights in the apartment flickered, then went out. In the sudden darkness, illuminated only by our candles, the planchette continued to move, spelling out the same phrase repeatedly, "Always watching." "Now," I commanded, "to goodbye." "Push it there together!" With collective effort, we forced the planchette to the word at the bottom of the board. "Goodbye." We shouted in unison. The candles extinguished simultaneously. For a moment, absolute darkness enveloped us. Then a single blinding flash of light illuminated the room, and in that instant I saw a figure standing in the corner. Not Ryan, not anyone I recognized, but something wearing the approximation of a human form, its features obscured by shadow despite the intense light. When the lights came back on moments later, we were alone in the apartment. The Ouija board was completely blank, all my careful lettering and symbols erased as if they had never existed. We never found Ryan. The official investigation concluded that he had left campus voluntarily, possibly experiencing a mental health crisis. His car was discovered abandoned at a hiking trailhead 50 miles from the cabin, with no sign of foul play. But we knew the truth, or at least part of it. Something had taken him, something we had inadvertently invited into our lives through a simple act of curiosity. In the months that followed, the strange occurrences gradually subsided. The moving objects, the unexplained sounds, the feeling of being watched, all slowly faded. But they never disappeared completely. Even now, years later, I sometimes wake to the sound of 3 deliberate knocks, or catch glimpses of symbols forming momentarily on my bathroom mirror after a shower. And occasionally, when I'm alone at night, I hear whispering, too faint to understand, but persistent, waiting, watching. I've learned to live with it, this persistent echo of our mistake. But I've never used a Ouija board again, nor will I ever. Some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed, and some prices are too high for mere curiosity. I never considered myself someone who collected dolls. Throughout my childhood, toys held little fascination for me. While other girls my age accumulated stuffed animals and plastic figurines, I found myself drawn to books and outdoor adventures. The few toys I did own could easily be counted on both hands, and by the time I turned 14, I had given most away to younger cousins in the family. The larger of my 2 porcelain dolls came into my possession when I was 10 years old, a birthday gift from my closest friend, Jade. We had been inseparable since 1st grade, sharing secrets and spending countless afternoons exploring the woods behind my house. The doll arrived in an ornate box, its face hauntingly lifelike with pale, unblemished skin and deep, almost iridescent blue eyes that seemed to shift color depending on how the light hit them. "This isn't just any doll," my grandmother informed me after the birthday party had ended. She held it carefully, her weathered hands contrasting with the doll's pristine features. "Porcelain dolls like this one are collector's items. They're meant to be displayed, not played with." I nodded, somewhat indifferent at the time. The doll wore an elaborate Victorian-style dress of deep burgundy with intricate lace details and a matching wide-brimmed hat that cast shadows across its face when positioned just so. I placed it on my dresser, where it remained largely forgotten as I continued my ordinary 10-year-old life. The smaller doll joined my reluctant collection approximately 2 years later as an Easter gift from my grandmother. Unlike its counterpart, this doll featured softer features, rosy cheeks, a gentle smile, and light brown hair arranged in perfect ringlets. My 2 sisters received identical dolls that Easter morning, though theirs mysteriously disappeared within months. Whether lost during our frequent relocations or deliberately misplaced due to growing discomfort, neither sister seemed particularly troubled by their absence. I've now had these dolls for nearly 12 years. I'm 24 as I document these experiences, having carried these porcelain companions through 3 different homes, 2 college dormitories, and now my first apartment. During this time, I've accumulated a series of incidents that I can no longer dismiss as coincidence or imagination. What follows is my attempt to chronicle these events in the hope that committing them to paper might provide some clarity, or at the very least, a record should the occurrences continue to escalate. Our log cabin home sat nestled against the edge of dense woodland, the kind of picturesque rural setting that appears idyllic in daylight but transforms into something altogether more sinister after sunset. We had lived there approximately 3 years when my sisters came to live with us following my parents' separation. The adjustment period was challenging as we established new routines and boundaries. The cabin's rustic charm extended to creaking floorboards and settling noises that became the soundtrack of our nights. At first, we attributed every unexpected sound to the natural movements of an aging wooden structure. However, certain occurrences defied such rational explanations. The first incident I can recall with absolute clarity happened during a thunderstorm in late autumn. Power outages were common in our remote location, so we had gathered in the living room with flashlights and candles, telling ghost stories to pass the time. My younger sister Irene, 13 at the time, had just finished recounting a particularly chilling tale when the conversation turned to items in our home that made them uncomfortable. "That porcelain doll on your dresser," Irene said, her voice lowering instinctively. "The way it watches from under that hat, I can't stand being alone in your room with it." My middle sister, Vanessa, nodded in agreement. "Every time I walk past your room, I feel like it's following me with its eyes." I laughed dismissively. "It's just a doll. It's not even particularly well made. Most of its eyelashes have fallen off." "Would you mind pushing the hat down over its face when we're home?" Irene asked. "Just so it isn't looking at us?" To humor them, I agreed, though I found their concern amusing. I had owned the larger doll for nearly 4 years by then and had never felt anything unsettling about it. My more spiritually inclined friend Renee had once suggested that perhaps the dolls had formed some attachment to me as their owner. This explanation seemed fanciful but harmless. That night, after the power returned and my sisters had fallen asleep, I sat at my desk completing homework. From the corner of my eye, I noticed something unusual. The doll's hat had shifted slightly, exposing one glazed eye that seemed to be angled directly toward me. I distinctly remembered pushing the hat down as promised, making sure both eyes were completely covered. Dismissing it as a result of the house settling or perhaps my own imperfect memory, I approached the doll and readjusted its hat. As my fingers brushed against the porcelain face, I noted with surprise that it felt unusually warm to the touch, almost as if it retained body heat. The scientific part of my mind immediately sought explanations. Perhaps it had been sitting near my reading lamp, absorbing heat from the bulb. I returned to my homework, but found myself unable to concentrate, repeatedly glancing back at the doll on my dresser. That night, for the first time, I turned it to face the wall before going to sleep. In the following weeks, I began noticing small irregularities. Items on my dresser would be slightly rearranged. The doll's hat would be raised despite my consistent efforts to keep it lowered. Once I returned from school to find the doll had rotated approximately 45 degrees from its previous position. When I mentioned these observations casually to my grandmother, she dismissed them with practical explanations. The house settling, drafts from the poorly sealed windows, or perhaps my sisters entering my room despite our agreement about personal space. These explanations satisfied me temporarily, but couldn't account for what happened next. Within months of moving in, both of my sisters had developed elaborate rituals before entering my bedroom. Irene would knock 3 times, call my name, and wait for a response before crossing the threshold. Vanessa refused to enter unless I was physically present in the room. When questioned about these behaviors, both admitted their discomfort stemmed from the porcelain dolls. "They watch us," Vanessa explained one evening as we prepared dinner together. "Not just the way normal dolls seem to stare. They actively track movement." "That's impossible," I countered, slicing vegetables with perhaps more force than necessary. "They're inanimate objects." "Then why do you always find the hat raised when you've pushed it down?" she challenged. "And why does the smaller one always end up facing the door no matter which way you position it?" I had no satisfactory answer, having noticed these phenomena myself, but dismissed them as coincidence or faulty memory. The following weekend, Irene approached me with an unusually serious expression. "Something happened yesterday when you were at swim practice," she began, fidgeting with her bracelet. "I needed to borrow your graphing calculator for math homework. I called for Grandma, but she was in the garden and couldn't hear me." She paused, seeming to gather courage before continuing. "I stood at your doorway for almost 5 minutes, trying to work up the nerve to go in alone. The larger doll was on your dresser where it always is, but something felt different. The atmosphere in your room felt pressurized somehow, like the air before a severe storm." Irene described how she finally entered, keeping her eyes averted from the dresser as she moved toward my desk. I found the calculator and turned to leave, but something compelled me to look at the doll. The hat was raised completely, and I absolutely swear, its head had turned to follow my movement across the room. She had dropped the calculator and fled downstairs, refusing to return to the second floor until our grandmother or I was home. When I checked later, the calculator lay on the floor precisely where she claimed to have dropped it, and the doll sat on the dresser with its hat fully raised, though I had lowered it before leaving that morning. That night I conducted a simple experiment. Before going to bed, I positioned both dolls facing the wall, measuring the exact distance between them and marking their positions with small strips of tape on the dresser surface. I took photographs with my phone to document their arrangement. When I woke the next morning, the smaller doll remained in position, but the larger one had rotated approximately 30 degrees toward my bed. The tape marker remained in place, indicating the doll had moved without disturbing its base. I checked my phone. The photograph confirmed my memory wasn't faulty. Something had shifted the doll's position during the night. The summer I turned 17, I traveled to Florida to stay with relatives for 6 weeks. Before leaving, I made special arrangements for my dolls at my sister's insistence. I placed the larger doll facing my bed with its hat pulled down completely over its face. The smaller doll I positioned on a bookshelf, facing away from the room entirely. My sisters shared the large bedroom with me in our log cabin home, a spacious area that accommodated 3 full-sized beds, a futon, television, and 3 dressers with room to spare. Despite sharing this space, they requested these specific arrangements to ensure their comfort during my absence. 2 weeks into my trip, I received a disturbing phone call from Vanessa. Her voice trembled as she recounted what had occurred earlier that day. "I was coming up the stairs to get my laptop charger," she began, her words rushing together. "You know how the staircase has that landing where you can see into our room through the banister? Well, I was about halfway up when I glanced over." She paused, and I could hear her taking deep breaths to steady herself. "The larger doll was sitting on your dresser, facing the staircase directly. Its hat was completely raised, and its head, I swear this is true, was angled downward as if it was watching me climb the stairs. I know exactly how we left it before you left. Irene and I both made sure of it." Vanessa described how she had frozen on the stairs, unable to continue upward or retreat back down for several terrifying seconds. When she finally regained control of her limbs, she raced back down to the kitchen where our grandmother was preparing lunch. "The worst part," she continued, "is what Irene told me afterward. She swears that 2 days ago she found the doll sitting on your bed, partially covered by your blankets, as if it had crawled under them itself. She put it back on the dresser, fixed the hat, and didn't tell me because she thought I'd done it as a prank." This revelation disturbed me more than I wanted to admit. My grandmother, ever practical, suggested that perhaps one of them had moved the doll subconsciously or forgotten doing so. When I returned home 3 weeks later, I found the larger doll exactly where Vanessa described, on the dresser, facing outward, with its hat raised to expose its glass eyes. The smaller doll, however, had disappeared entirely from the bookshelf. After a thorough search, I discovered it inside my closet, nestled between winter sweaters that hadn't been touched in months. That night, I experienced something that confirmed my sister's experiences weren't mere imagination. I woke around 3 in the morning to the distinct sensation of being watched. The moonlight filtering through my curtains provided just enough illumination to make out shapes in the darkness. As my eyes adjusted, I realized with growing horror that both dolls now sat at the foot of my bed, their pale faces turned toward me. I remained perfectly still, convinced I must be dreaming or experiencing sleep paralysis. I forced myself to close my eyes and count slowly to 100. When I opened them again, the dolls had returned to their original positions, the larger one on the dresser, the smaller on the bookshelf. In the morning, I dismissed the incident as a particularly vivid nightmare, yet the lingering doubt remained, intensified by the discovery of a small tear in my comforter precisely where I had seen the dolls sitting in my supposed dream. 2 years later, my family relocated to a modern 2-story home across town. The move represented a fresh start for all of us, away from the creaking floors and drafty windows of the log cabin. My bedroom in the new house was smaller but brighter, with large windows that eliminated the shadowy corners I had grown accustomed to. For the first time, I seriously considered not bringing the porcelain dolls. They sat in a moving box for nearly 3 weeks after we'd settled in, until guilt or perhaps some inexplicable sense of obligation compelled me to unpack them. I arranged them on a wooden bookshelf near my door, positioning them between novels so they appeared more like casual decorations than focal points. My grandmother, who lived with us, seemed relieved by the new home's solid construction and absence of unexplained noises. The first month passed uneventfully, leading us all to relax into our new routines. I had been accepted to a nearby university and was preparing for my freshman year, spending long hours studying and rarely paying attention to the dolls. One morning in early autumn, my grandmother approached me during breakfast with an unusual question. "Did you hear someone knocking in your room last night?" she asked, stirring her tea with unnecessary focus. "No," I replied, confused. "I slept through the night." "Why?" She described waking around 2:30 a.m. to the distinct sound of knocking, not gentle tapping, but deliberate, forceful impacts, as if someone were pounding a fist against wood. The sound had come from the direction of my bedroom, she was certain. "I thought perhaps your mini fridge was malfunctioning," she continued. "Sometimes they make that knocking sound when the compressor is failing." Concerned, I checked the mini fridge immediately after breakfast, but it was functioning perfectly, no unusual sounds or temperature issues. I inspected my entire room carefully, but found nothing that could explain the knocking my grandmother had heard. 3 nights later, it happened again. This time, I was studying late in the living room when my grandmother appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "There's that knocking again," she whispered. "Coming from your room." Together we walked upstairs, but as we approached my bedroom, the sound abruptly ceased. My door stood partially open, exactly as I had left it. Inside, nothing appeared disturbed. The porcelain dolls sat on their shelf, their glassy eyes reflecting the hallway light. My grandmother, always practical and skeptical of supernatural explanations, suggested we check the attic access panel in the ceiling outside my room, thinking perhaps an animal had become trapped. We found nothing. She then proposed the knocking might be coming from the pipes within the walls, though the plumber who inspected them the following day found no issues. The knocking occurred twice more during the following week, always when I wasn't in my room and always stopping before I could reach the source. On the 5th occurrence, something different happened. My grandmother heard the now familiar pounding and immediately called for me. I sprinted upstairs, determined to catch whatever was causing the disturbance. As I reached the top step, I heard it clearly. 3 distinct knocks against wood, followed by silence, then 3 more. The sound emanated unquestionably from my bedroom. I pushed the door open fully and flipped on the light. The room appeared exactly as I had left it, with one exception. The smaller porcelain doll lay on the floor beneath the bookshelf, as if it had fallen or been thrown. Its tiny porcelain hand rested against the wooden baseboard, precisely the spot from which the knocking seemed to originate. I stood frozen in the doorway, unable to reconcile what I was seeing with what I knew to be possible. My grandmother appeared behind me, her breath catching as she observed the scene. "It must have fallen," she said finally, her voice strained. "The shelf might be uneven." I nodded mutely and entered the room to retrieve the doll. As I lifted it, I noticed something that made my stomach constrict. A small chip in its porcelain hand, fresh and sharp-edged, revealing the chalky white material beneath the glazed surface. The location of the chip aligned perfectly with where it would strike the baseboard if used to knock. That night, I packed both dolls carefully in a storage container and placed them in the back of my closet. Neither my grandmother nor I mentioned the incident again, as if by mutual unspoken agreement. For several weeks, our home remained blissfully quiet at night. During my freshman year of college, I returned home primarily for holidays and occasional weekends. The dolls remained sealed in their container in my closet, undisturbed and largely forgotten as I adapted to campus life. My sisters had both moved out by then, Vanessa to attend a university on the opposite coast, and Irene to live with our father in another state. The Christmas break of my sophomore year brought an unexpected visitor to our home. Rebecca, a childhood friend who had moved away during middle school, had returned to town to visit relatives. Having reconnected through social media, she eagerly accepted my invitation for dinner at our house. The evening progressed pleasantly with conversation and reminiscing until Rebecca mentioned hearing about those creepy dolls from mutual friends. My grandmother tensed visibly across the table, but I laughed it off, explaining that my sisters had always been unnecessarily frightened by perfectly ordinary porcelain dolls. "I'd love to see them," Rebecca said, her eyes bright with curiosity. I've always been fascinated by supposedly haunted objects. Reluctantly, I led her upstairs to my bedroom. The storage container remained untouched in my closet, gathering dust. I hesitated before opening it, surprised by my own reluctance. Rebecca watched eagerly as I removed the lid and carefully unwrapped the tissue paper surrounding the larger doll. Its face emerged from the wrappings, the painted features somehow more vivid than I remembered. The blue eyes caught the light, creating the illusion of depth where none should exist. Rebecca gasped appreciatively, reaching out to touch the fabric of its dress. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "Can I take a picture to show my mom? She collects antique dolls." I nodded absently, distracted by the smaller doll still nestled in tissue paper. Something about its position seemed wrong, though I couldn't immediately identify what bothered me. As Rebecca positioned her phone to photograph the larger doll, I realized what had caught my attention. The smaller doll's head had rotated within its wrappings, its face now pressed against the transparent plastic of the container as if peering outward. "Wait until I take it out completely," I said, reaching for the larger doll to position it better for the photograph. As I lifted it from the container, the hat fell back, exposing its face entirely. Rebecca aimed her phone and tapped the screen to focus. Suddenly she jerked backward, nearly dropping her phone in the process. "Did you see that?" she asked, her voice high with alarm. "See what?" Its eyes, they moved. Just as I took the picture, they flicked to the side, looking directly at the camera. I dismissed her claim immediately. "That's impossible. It's a fixed porcelain doll." Rebecca thrust her phone toward me, her hand trembling slightly. "Look at the picture. Tell me what you see." The photograph showed the doll held in my hands, its face clearly visible. What struck me was the direction of its gaze, while I remembered its eyes facing forward as they always had. In the image, they were undeniably shifted toward the camera lens, creating the unsettling impression of direct eye contact with the viewer. "It's just the angle," I said firmly, though doubt crept through me. Or maybe a reflection on the glass eyes. Rebecca wasn't convinced. She insisted on taking another photograph, this time recording a short video as well. In the second image, the doll's eyes appeared normal, facing forward as expected. The video showed nothing unusual, just a porcelain doll held in my increasingly unsteady hands. After Rebecca left that evening, I examined the dolls more carefully. The smaller one had indeed shifted position within its wrappings, though I had sealed the container months ago, and it had remained undisturbed in my closet. The larger doll's eyes appeared normal now, but I couldn't dismiss what I had seen in the photograph. Against my better judgment, I decided to place them on my desk rather than return them to storage. Perhaps constant observation would provide answers to questions I had been avoiding for years. That night, I awoke to the sound of something scratching gently against wood. Keeping my breathing steady and my eyes nearly closed, I scanned the darkened room. The dolls remained on my desk, their outlines visible in the faint glow from my alarm clock. As I watched through half-lidded eyes, the scratching sound came again. The larger doll's arm moved, a tiny, almost imperceptible motion. Its porcelain hand dragged across the wooden surface of the desk, creating the scratching noise I had heard. I remained perfectly still, fear constricting my throat as I witnessed what should have been impossible. The doll's head rotated slowly until its eyes fixed on my position in the bed. Though I couldn't make out its expression clearly in the darkness, I felt with absolute certainty that it was aware of my consciousness. After what seemed like hours but was likely only minutes, I summoned the courage to reach for my bedside lamp. The instant light flooded the room, all movement ceased. Both dolls sat innocently on the desk, positioned exactly as I had left them before going to sleep. The following morning, I examined the desk surface carefully, finding 3 tiny scratch marks in the wood where the doll's hand had rested. The incidents grew more frequent after Rebecca's visit, as if her acknowledgement of the doll's strange properties had somehow emboldened them. I returned to university after the holiday break with a mixture of relief and guilt, having once again sealed the dolls in their container and placed them in my closet. My junior year brought new challenges and distractions that pushed thoughts of the dolls to the periphery of my consciousness. I moved into an off-campus apartment with 2 roommates, immersed myself in my studies, and began an internship that consumed most of my free time. For nearly 8 months, I managed to visit home only briefly, never staying overnight. When summer arrived, however, financial necessity required me to move back into my childhood bedroom temporarily. The storage container remained undisturbed in my closet, exactly where I had left it. For the first week, I avoided opening it, telling myself I had outgrown such childish fears. My grandmother noticed my avoidance but said nothing until one evening when we sat alone on the back porch, watching fireflies emerge in the gathering dusk. "They've been active while you were gone," she said quietly, not needing to specify what they referred to. I turned to her in surprise. My grandmother had always been the voice of reason, offering logical explanations for every strange occurrence. Her acknowledgement of the doll's activity represented a significant departure from her usual pragmatism. "What happened?" I asked, uncertain if I truly wanted to know. She sighed, her gaze fixed on the darkening yard. "The knocking returned about 2 months after you left. Always from your closet, always 3 distinct knocks followed by silence, then 3 more. I ignored it at first." She described how, after several weeks of this pattern, she had finally entered my room and opened the closet, finding the storage container exactly as I had left it. When she removed the lid, however, both dolls were positioned differently than I had placed them, sitting upright, facing the closet door as if waiting for it to open. "I told myself I was being foolish," she continued, "that you must have positioned them that way before leaving. But I know you didn't." What followed was a detailed account of increasingly disturbing events. My grandmother described finding the closet door open on multiple occasions despite having closed it securely. She mentioned items in my room being rearranged, books removed from shelves, desk drawers partially opened, my bedspread disturbed as if someone had sat on its edge. "The last incident happened just 3 days before you came home," she said, her voice dropping to near a whisper. "I was awakened by what sounded like footsteps in your room. Light, careful steps moving from the closet to your bed and back again. I gathered my courage and opened your door without warning, turning on the light immediately." My grandmother's hands trembled slightly as she described what she had seen, the larger doll sitting on my pillow, the smaller one positioned at the foot of the bed. The storage container in the closet stood open, its lid on the floor beside it. "I convinced myself I must have checked the container earlier and forgotten to secure it properly," she said, "that perhaps the house settling had caused the dolls to fall into those positions. But deep down, I knew better." That night, after my grandmother had gone to bed, I approached my closet with determined steps. The time for avoidance had passed. I opened the door and knelt before the storage container, removing its lid slowly. Both dolls lay wrapped in tissue paper, positioned horizontally as one would expect. Nothing appeared unusual or disturbed. I unwrapped them carefully, examining each for signs of damage or alteration. Finding nothing, I made a decision. I placed both dolls on my dresser, positioning them side by side, facing my bed. Then I took out my phone and opened a time-lapse recording application. I set the phone on my bookshelf, aimed toward the dresser, and programmed it to capture one frame every 30 seconds throughout the night. With this surveillance in place, I went to bed, leaving a small lamp illuminated to ensure the camera would capture any movement. Despite my exhaustion, sleep evaded me for hours as I periodically opened my eyes to check the dolls' positions. They remained motionless until I finally drifted off around 2 in the morning. The harsh sound of my alarm woke me at 7. Sunlight streamed through my curtains, casting the room in a warm glow that seemed to contradict the uneasiness I felt. My first glance confirmed what I both expected and dreaded. The dolls had moved. The larger one now stood at the edge of the dresser, its porcelain hand extended outward as if reaching toward my bed. The smaller doll had rotated completely, its back now facing the room. With trembling fingers, I retrieved my phone and opened the time-lapse recording. The footage began normally, showing the dolls positioned as I had left them. For the first 2 hours, nothing changed. Then, at approximately 1:42 a.m. according to the timestamp, the smaller doll's head rotated slowly, a movement that should have been physically impossible given its fixed porcelain construction. At 2:17 a.m., the larger doll began to move. Unlike the smaller one's subtle shift, this movement was more pronounced. It appeared to lift itself incrementally, using tiny, jerking motions to change its position until it stood at the dresser's edge, arm extended. The recording continued until morning, showing no further movement after the dolls reached the positions in which I found them. I replayed the footage 3 times, searching for signs of manipulation or natural explanation. Finding none, I was forced to confront the reality I had been avoiding for years. The dolls moved on their own. I am 24 now, sitting in my first solo apartment with both porcelain dolls displayed on a shelf across from my desk. After years of unexplained phenomena, I have reached an unusual arrangement with these inanimate, yet somehow conscious objects. Following the recorded evidence of their movement, I spent months researching similar accounts, consulting with collectors of antique dolls, and even meeting discreetly with a paranormal investigator recommended by Rebecca. None provided satisfactory explanations for what I had experienced and documented. The paranormal investigator suggested the dolls might host attachments, spirits or energies bound to the physical objects for reasons unknown. She recommended destroying them to sever the connection. The doll collector warned that breaking porcelain dolls was considered deeply unlucky in multiple cultures, potentially releasing whatever essence they contained. My grandmother, in a surprising departure from her lifelong skepticism, suggested a third option. "They've never harmed you," she pointed out. "Their activities increase when you're absent or ignoring them, but remain relatively benign when you acknowledge their presence." This observation aligned with my own experiences. The most dramatic incidents had occurred during periods when I had stored the dolls away or left home for extended periods. When displayed openly and treated with a certain degree of acknowledgement, their activities diminished in frequency and intensity. So began our strange coexistence. I keep the dolls displayed prominently in whatever space I inhabit. Each morning I acknowledge them verbally, a simple greeting that feels both ridiculous and necessary. When traveling, I inform them of my departure date and expected return, placing them in positions facing the door as if awaiting my return. In exchange, their movements have become more subtle and less frequent. Objects in my apartment remain undisturbed. The knocking has ceased entirely. Occasionally, I still find them in slightly altered positions, particularly after mentioning them to others or writing about them as I am doing now. As I complete this account, I notice the smaller doll has rotated slightly to face the computer screen. The larger one remains in position, though its hat has raised just enough to expose its glass eyes. I feel their attention focused on my words, perhaps curious about how their story will be told. I have accepted that I may never understand what animates these porcelain figures. Perhaps they contain energies beyond scientific explanation, Perhaps long years of projected emotions and fears have somehow manifested in physical movement. Perhaps there is a perfectly rational explanation that continues to elude me. What I know with certainty is that destroying them feels wrong, not merely out of superstition, but from a deeper sense that they are, in their way, attached to me as their caretaker. They have followed me through childhood into adulthood, witnessing my development with their unchanging porcelain faces. In strange moments of honesty with myself, I acknowledged that I would miss their presence if they were gone. So we continue our unusual relationship, these watching dolls and I. They remain mostly still when observed, coming alive in the periphery of my attention or during the unguarded hours of night. I maintain my rituals of acknowledgement, treating them with a respect that feels earned rather than irrational. Sometimes in the darkest hours before dawn, I awaken to find the larger doll has moved closer to my bedside. Its painted face reveals nothing, but I sense something almost protective in its posture, as if having attached itself to me. It now stands guard against other, less familiar entities that might wish me harm. Good morning, I say to them now, as I prepare to end this writing session. Thank you for letting me share your story. The air in my apartment feels momentarily heavy, then settles. Outside my window, the world continues its normal rhythms, unaware of the small, inexplicable reality we have created here. I save this document and close my laptop, turning to face my porcelain companions directly. Their glass eyes reflect the afternoon light, revealing nothing and everything about our shared history. I no longer fear what I don't understand. Some mysteries, I have learned, are best left unexamined too closely, respected from a careful distance, acknowledged but not disturbed. And so we watch each other, these dolls and I, neither fully understanding the other but having reached a form of peace in our mutual observation. Sometimes I wonder who is really the watcher and who is being watched. Perhaps in the end it doesn't matter. We have found our equilibrium in this strange, unspoken arrangement, and for now that seems enough. The film studies project seemed straightforward enough at first. Choose a topic, conduct research, compile the information, and perhaps gain some insight along the way. When my friend Antonio and I registered for Professor Weber's documentary class that autumn semester, we anticipated a pleasant diversion from our usual academic routine. The assignment parameters were uncomplicated. Create a short documentary about a subject of our choosing. However, being ambitious students with a natural competitive streak, we decided to undertake something more substantial, a project that would distinguish our work from our classmates and, more importantly, explore a topic we found genuinely intriguing. That decision led us deep into Hargrove Forest, just 30 miles from our university campus. Our objective was to examine and ultimately disprove the local legends that had kept most people away from this woodland for generations. Despite its reputation, Hargrove possessed an undeniable beauty, towering oak and maple trees with dense foliage, undergrowth teeming with wildlife, and a distinctive stillness that initially seemed therapeutic. Yet that silence possessed a certain weight, an atmosphere that felt expectant, as though the entire forest was anticipating some imminent event. The folklore surrounding Hargrove Forest dated back centuries. Indigenous communities once inhabited the area, considering the forest sacred ground, the typical foundation for countless American haunted locations. Over time, tales of apparitions, malevolent entities, and occult ceremonies emerged. In my estimation, these were merely antiquated myths that became increasingly exaggerated as they passed through successive generations. This is perfect documentary material, Antonio said as we reviewed our preliminary research notes in my apartment. We'll demonstrate how these legends develop and persist despite having no factual basis. Exactly, I replied, scanning through old newspaper clippings about the forest. We've got historical context, contemporary accounts, and plenty of atmospheric footage potential. Professor Weber will eat this up. The majority of local residents avoided Hargrove entirely, while the few who ventured inside often returned with accounts of negative energies and inexplicable sensations. Antonio and I, both firmly grounded in rationality, dismissed these reports as manifestations of pre-existing fears and suggestion. We viewed superstition as an intellectual weakness and considered ourselves immune to such psychological vulnerabilities. What if we stay overnight? Antonio suggested, his excitement visibly building. That would add incredible authenticity to our project. I hesitated momentarily before agreeing. We could capture some phenomenal night footage. The contrast between daytime and nighttime perceptions of the same location would be compelling. Our documentary would systematically dismantle each superstition and reveal Hargrove Forest as nothing more than an ordinary woodland area, albeit one with an unusually captivating atmosphere. Little did we understand that our academic exercise would transform into something far more harrowing. The following 3 weeks involved intensive preparation. We interviewed local historians, reviewed archival materials, and consulted with our university's anthropology department about the indigenous history of the region. The more we learned, the more convinced we became that Hargrove's reputation stemmed from misunderstandings and deliberate embellishments. Professor Jameson from the anthropology department provided valuable context during our meeting. The Naskapi people considered certain natural locations as thresholds between worlds, he explained, adjusting his glasses. But their concept of other worlds was more metaphorical than literal, representing states of consciousness rather than physical realms. So nothing supernatural, I clarified, making notes. Their beliefs were spiritual but grounded in natural phenomena, he continued. Modern interpretations have distorted these concepts significantly. Antonio and I compiled local newspaper reports spanning the past century. The earliest accounts described Hargrove merely as unsettling or strangely quiet. By the 1940s, stories mentioned disembodied voices and unexplained lights. The 1970s introduced claims of satanic cults performing rituals, while the most recent accounts included elaborate tales of apparitions and mysterious disappearances, none substantiated by official records. Notice how the stories become progressively more dramatic? Antonio observed as we organized our timeline. Classic urban legend evolution. We acquired specialized equipment for our expedition, high-definition cameras with night vision capabilities, sensitive audio recorders, thermal imaging devices, and environmental sensors to monitor temperature fluctuations. We weren't attempting to detect paranormal activity, but rather to document the absence of anomalies while creating compelling visual material. The evening before our scheduled departure, we reviewed our shooting script and equipment checklist one final time. Our plan included specific filming locations, interview questions for any hikers we might encounter, and contingency procedures for inclement weather. What about cell reception? I asked, suddenly concerned about communication. Antonio checked his phone. Coverage maps show it's spotty but not entirely absent. We should maintain intermittent connectivity. Perfect, I replied. We'll keep location services active throughout, just as a precaution. We plan to begin filming at dawn, capturing the forest awakening in natural light before documenting specific locations mentioned in the legends. Our itinerary included several caves, an abandoned ranger station, and a clearing where purported rituals had occurred. We would remain until after midnight, documenting the forest's transition from day to night. That evening, I experienced an unexpected moment of apprehension while packing my equipment. A text message from my mother, who knew nothing of our specific plans, arrived with uncanny timing. Be careful tomorrow. Trust your instincts. I dismissed the coincidence and continued preparing, yet the message lingered in my thoughts as I drove to meet Antonio the following morning. We arrived at Hargrove Forest shortly after sunrise on a crisp October morning. The parking area, little more than a gravel clearing at the trailhead, was completely deserted. Orange and yellow leaves carpeted the ground, creating a striking contrast against the remaining green foliage. Antonio and I distributed the equipment between our backpacks, activated our recording devices, and began our journey into the woodland. Initial impressions of Hargrove Forest, I narrated for our documentary's opening sequence. Time is 7:42 a.m., temperature approximately 48 degrees Fahrenheit. Conditions are ideal for filming, clear skies with minimal wind. Antonio captured establishing shots of the forest entrance while I continued the narration. For generations, this ordinary woodland has inspired extraordinary fears. Today, we'll examine these legends through an objective lens and demonstrate how human psychology creates monsters from shadows. The initial hours progress smoothly. We documented the terrain's gradual transition from sparse edge growth to denser interior woodland. Bird calls and insect sounds provided natural ambient audio, though we both remarked on the relative quietness compared to other forests we'd visited. "Notice how the sounds seem dampened?" Antonio commented while adjusting his microphone settings. "Probably due to the density of the undergrowth absorbing acoustic energy, but it certainly contributes to the unsettling atmosphere people report." By midday, we'd covered approximately 4 miles of trails, capturing footage of several locations mentioned in the legends. A lightning-struck oak tree allegedly used for hangings, a small stream where spectral children were supposedly heard playing, and a moss-covered stone formation that resembled an altar. Nothing we encountered suggested anything beyond natural formation and coincidental resemblance. "This is proving exactly what we hypothesized," I said during our lunch break. "Everything has a rational explanation." Antonio nodded while reviewing the morning's footage on his camera's display. "The footage looks great. The lighting through these trees creates naturally eerie effects without any enhancement." After lunch, we ventured deeper into the forest, following a deteriorating trail toward the abandoned ranger station. The path narrowed considerably, forcing us to navigate increasingly difficult terrain. The tree canopy thickened overhead, reducing the available light and necessitating camera adjustments. "The temperature has dropped noticeably," I observed, consulting our environmental sensor. "Nearly 8 degrees cooler than the forest entrance, which is significant over such a short distance." "Microclimate effects," Antonio replied, though his tone carried less certainty than before. As afternoon transitioned toward evening, subtle changes occurred in the forest atmosphere. The sporadic bird calls diminished until they ceased entirely. The characteristic rustling of woodland creatures became intermittent, then absent. Even the gentle breeze that had persisted throughout the day seemed to still. "Audio check," I whispered into my microphone. "Time is 5:17 p.m. Ambient sounds have decreased significantly within the past hour." Antonio scanned our surroundings with growing unease. "Could be the approaching evening. Many woodland species reduce activity during transition periods." Yet we both recognized something distinctive in this silence, a quality that transcended normal environmental shifts. The forest hadn't simply grown quiet. It had become unnaturally still, as though sound itself was being absorbed by some unseen presence. "Let's continue toward the ranger station," I suggested, attempting to maintain our original plan despite mounting discomfort. "We should reach it before darkness falls completely." We resumed walking, our footsteps suddenly conspicuous against the background silence. Each snapping twig or rustling leaf produced by our movement seemed to reverberate with unnatural clarity. Neither of us spoke as we proceeded, communicating instead through glances and gestures. The ranger station appeared unexpectedly, a dilapidated wooden structure partially reclaimed by vegetation. Its windows remained intact but were darkened with accumulated grime. The entrance door hung partially open, revealing a shadowed interior. "Perfect location for the evening filming sequence," Antonio whispered, though his enthusiasm had noticeably diminished. I approached the structure cautiously, filming its exterior from multiple angles. "This ranger station was abandoned in 1997 following budget reallocation," I narrated. "Local legends claim forest rangers reported unusual occurrences here, including equipment malfunctions and disembodied voices. These accounts likely stem from natural phenomena, wind through structural openings, wildlife sounds misinterpreted in isolation, and the psychological effects of prolonged solitude." As I concluded my narration, a distinct sound emerged from within the station, a soft, rhythmic tapping like fingernails against wood. Antonio and I exchanged alarmed glances. The sound continued for approximately 10 seconds before ceasing abruptly. "Probably an animal," I rationalized, though my voice betrayed uncertainty. "A woodpecker or squirrel inside the structure." "Let's check it out," Antonio replied, his documentary filmmaker instincts briefly overriding caution. We approached the entrance together, camera lights illuminating the darkened interior. The single-room structure contained little beyond an abandoned desk, toppled chair, and metal filing cabinet. No animals or obvious sources for the tapping sound were visible. "Temperature reading is showing a significant drop," I noted, consulting our sensor. "Nearly 15 degrees colder inside than outside." Thermal isolation effect, Antonio suggested, though his explanation sounded hollow, even to my sympathetic ears. We conducted a thorough examination of the station interior, documenting each corner despite our growing discomfort. As daylight continued fading, we decided against remaining there overnight as originally planned. Let's explore the caves instead, I proposed. They featured more prominently in the legends anyway. The relief on Antonio's face was evident as we departed the ranger station, heading toward the cave system approximately half a mile deeper into the forest. Twilight descended rapidly as we navigated toward the cave system. Our headlamps created bobbing illumination that transformed the forest into a disorienting landscape of shifting shadows and indistinct shapes. The complete absence of wildlife sounds persisted, creating an acoustic vacuum filled only by our breathing and footsteps. Check your cell reception, I suggested, suddenly concerned about our increasingly isolated position. Antonio examined his phone. 1 bar intermittent. GPS still functioning, though. The cave entrance appeared gradually, a dark horizontal fissure in a limestone outcropping, partially concealed by overgrown vegetation. According to local legends, these caves had served as shelter for indigenous communities during harsh winters, and later became hideouts for fugitives during Prohibition. More recent stories claimed they contained evidence of occult activities. Hartwell Cave System, I narrated for our documentary, formed approximately 12,000 years ago through limestone erosion. The entrance measures roughly 7 feet high by 12 feet wide. We positioned our equipment carefully, establishing lighting to capture the cave's entrance from multiple angles. The cave mouth exhaled cool air that carried a distinct mineral scent and something else, a subtle organic odor reminiscent of decay. Let's examine the interior, Antonio suggested, activating his camera's night vision function. Just the entrance chamber for now. We proceeded cautiously, documenting the gradual transition from external forest to subterranean environment. The entrance chamber extended approximately 30 feet inward, before branching into 3 narrower passages. Mineral formations created fascinating patterns along the walls and ceiling, calcium deposits that gleamed under our lights like organic sculptures. These natural formations likely inspired many supernatural interpretations, I commented, filming a particularly striking stalactite arrangement. Human tendency toward pareidolia, recognizing patterns and faces in random stimuli, could easily perceive these as intentional carvings or symbols. Antonio positioned his camera to capture the unique way exterior light filtered through the entrance, creating atmospheric beams that illuminated swirling dust particles. This lighting effect is phenomenal, he remarked. The way the light refracts would appear almost supernatural on camera without proper context. As we ventured deeper into the entrance chamber, the cave's acoustics became increasingly evident. Our voices returned with subtle distortion, not quite echoes, but altered reproductions that seemed slightly out of synchronization with our speech. This acoustic anomaly created a disquieting impression of additional presences just beyond perception. The audio distortion is remarkable, I observed, recording a sound test. No wonder visitors report hearing voices or whispers. The cave's natural acoustics create audio illusions. We spent approximately 40 minutes documenting the entrance chamber before selecting the central passage for further exploration. This corridor narrowed considerably, requiring us to proceed single file while carrying our equipment. The ceiling height decreased until we needed to stoop slightly to avoid contact with overhead formations. Approximately 50 feet into this passage, the corridor widened into a secondary chamber with ceiling height sufficient for comfortable standing. This space featured more elaborate mineral formations and evidence of water activity. A small pool of still water occupied the chamber's far corner, its surface perfectly motionless in the undisturbed environment. This chamber would be ideal for our night filming sequence, I suggested, scanning the space with my headlamp. The acoustics are particularly interesting, and these formations create compelling shadow patterns. Antonio nodded in agreement as he established our primary lighting arrangement. We positioned cameras to capture multiple angles simultaneously and prepared our audio equipment for optimal recording in the unusual acoustic environment. As we finalized our setup, a subtle shift occurred in the cave atmosphere. The temperature decreased perceptibly, not dramatically but noticeably enough to register on our environmental sensors. The air movement within the chamber altered, transitioning from the gentle outward flow we'd observed upon entering to absolute stillness. Temperature drop of 3 degrees in the past 90 seconds, I noted, consulting our equipment. Barometric pressure remaining consistent, though. Could be normal cave environment fluctuation, Antonio suggested, though his voice carried unmistakable tension. We began our filming sequence, documenting the chamber from various angles while I provided narration about the geological formation process and historical significance. Approximately 20 minutes into filming, Antonio suddenly froze mid-adjustment of his camera. "Listen," he whispered, his expression transforming from concentration to alarm. I paused, straining to detect whatever had disturbed him. Initially, I perceived nothing beyond our breathing and the subtle electronic hum of our equipment. Then I heard it, a faint rhythmic sound emanating from the passage we had traversed to reach this chamber. The sound defied immediate categorization. It resembled footsteps, but possessed an unusual cadence, alternating between rapid succession and measured intervals, as though whatever produced them shifted between walking and running. More disturbing was the directional quality. The sounds approached our position, then receded, then approached again, as though something paced indecisively at the passage entrance. "Is someone else here?" Antonio whispered, his camera temporarily forgotten. I shook my head, uncertain how to respond. The documented hiking patterns for Hargrove Forest indicated minimal visitation, particularly during weekdays. The probability of encountering other hikers in this specific location seemed extraordinarily low. The footstep sounds continued their erratic pattern, approaching, retreating, approaching again. We exchanged nervous glances, our documentary objectives temporarily forgotten amid rising apprehension. The rational explanations I had confidently provided throughout the day suddenly seemed insufficient. "We should investigate," I finally suggested, though my instincts screamed otherwise. Antonio nodded reluctantly, and we gathered minimal equipment, a single camera and our headlamps, before proceeding cautiously toward the passage entrance. The footsteps continued their irregular pattern, now seemingly stationary at the junction between our chamber and the connecting passage. As we approached the narrowed entrance to our chamber, the sounds abruptly ceased. We paused, listening intently in the sudden silence. Nothing disturbed the stillness for several long moments. Then, without warning, the footsteps resumed, no longer approaching or retreating, but circling our position, seemingly emanating from all surrounding passages simultaneously. "That's impossible," Antonio whispered, his voice barely audible. "The acoustics can't—" His statement remained unfinished as a new sound emerged, a soft, deliberate scraping along the stone walls, like fingernails dragging across the mineral surface. This sound circled our position just as the footsteps had, creating the impression of movement along the chamber walls. My scientific certainties evaporated as primal fear overwhelmed rational thought. Without verbalized agreement, Antonio and I began gathering our equipment with frantic urgency, abandoning any pretense of completing our planned filming sequence. "We need to leave," I stated unnecessarily, already moving toward the passage. The sound of fingernails against stone intensified as we prepared to depart, transitioning from rhythmic scraping to increasingly urgent scratching. The acoustic properties of the chamber amplified and distorted these sounds, creating an immersive experience of being surrounded by multiple entities attempting to breach the stone barriers. We abandoned non-essential equipment, prioritizing our cameras and recording devices, and entered the narrow passage leading back to the entrance chamber. The confined space heightened our vulnerability, forcing us to proceed in single file while the unsettling sounds continued behind us. The passage seemed longer during our retreat than it had during our entrance, each step measuring inadequate progress toward safety. Our headlamps cast wildly swinging illumination as we moved, transforming the passage walls into a nauseating blur of shifting shadows and mineral formations. When we finally emerged into the entrance chamber, the relative openness provided momentary relief until we noticed the changed quality of light. The exterior forest had transitioned to complete darkness during our time within the deeper chamber. The cave entrance now framed absolute blackness rather than the twilight we had left behind. "Check the time," I gasped, suddenly disoriented. Antonio consulted his watch with visible confusion. That's impossible. We've been inside for nearly 3 hours. Our perception suggested we had spent perhaps 40 minutes in the deeper chamber, yet according to our devices, significantly more time had elapsed. This temporal discrepancy added another layer of wrongness to our already disturbed experience. As we hesitated at the boundary between cave and forest, contemplating the darkness beyond, another sound emerged from behind us. Distinct footsteps approaching rapidly from the passage we had just traveled. No longer erratic or pacing, these footsteps communicated purposeful pursuit. We abandoned all remaining pretense of scientific investigation and rushed toward the cave entrance, our headlamps providing minimal illumination against the encompassing forest darkness. The air temperature dropped dramatically as we crossed the threshold from subterranean space to woodland, our exhaled breath immediately visible in the cold night air. The forest at night bore little resemblance to the woodland we had documented during daylight hours. Our headlamps created narrow corridors of visibility while the surrounding darkness seemed to compress around these artificial boundaries. The absence of ambient sound, no insects, no rustling vegetation, no distant animal calls, created an acoustic vacuum that emphasized our labored breathing and panicked movements. Which direction is the trail? Antonio gasped, swinging his headlamp in disoriented arcs. I consulted our GPS device, relieved to find it still functioning. Northeast from here, about 50 yards to intersect the main path. We oriented ourselves and began moving rapidly toward the trail, abandoning stealth in favor of speed. The terrain proved treacherous in darkness, exposed roots, uneven ground, and low-hanging branches creating constant hazards. Our progress became a series of stumbling advances and near falls, each impediment increasing our growing panic. Approximately 30 yards from our starting position, I risked a backward glance. My headlamp illuminated the cave entrance, a darker void within the general forest darkness. Nothing emerged from that opening, yet the certainty of pursuit remained undiminished. I think we're clear, I managed between labored breaths. As though summoned by my premature relief, movement registered at the periphery of my vision, not from the cave entrance but from the surrounding forest. I directed my headlamp toward this disturbance and momentarily glimpsed what appeared to be a human silhouette moving parallel to our position, approximately 20 yards to our right. "Antonio?" I hissed, gesturing toward the movement. He directed his light toward the indicated location, but illuminated only empty forest. "I don't see—" His statement terminated as additional movement appeared to our left. Another dark figure moving with uncanny smoothness through the dense undergrowth, maintaining precise distance from our position. "There's someone else out here," Antonio whispered, his voice constricted with fear. We increased our pace, abandoning any pretense of rational assessment. The trail materialized ahead, a slightly clearer path through the otherwise dense vegetation. We turned onto this established route and broke into a full run, our equipment bouncing painfully against our bodies. The trail should have provided easier navigation, yet in our panic, each twist and incline became a potential catastrophe. Antonio stumbled on an exposed root, nearly falling before I grasped his jacket and restored his balance. This momentary delay proved consequential. The pursuing figures drew perceptibly closer during our hesitation. I directed my headlamp backward, finally obtaining clear confirmation of our pursuers. Two dark figures moved swiftly through the trees, their forms partially obscured by shadows despite direct illumination. They appeared human in general outline but moved with unsettling fluidity, navigating obstacles that would impede normal hikers. "Run," I shouted, abandoning all restraint. We sprinted along the trail with desperate intensity, our progress hampered by limited visibility and increasing fatigue. The distance between ourselves and our pursuers fluctuated, momentarily increasing when we achieved maximum speed, then diminishing when obstacles forced us to slow. The forest transformed into a nightmare landscape of looming shadows and deceptive perspectives. Tree branches reached like grasping appendages across our path. Root systems emerged unexpectedly beneath our feet. Even the ground itself seemed animated with malicious intent, presenting sudden inclines and depressions precisely where they would most impede our flight. During one relatively straight section of trail, I risked another backward glance and felt paralyzing horror as I processed what I observed. Our pursuers had multiplied, no longer two dark figures, but three distinct silhouettes moving in coordinated pursuit. More terrifying than their number was their movement pattern, no longer maintaining cautious distance, but actively closing the gap between us with evident purpose. "They're gaining on us," I gasped, my voice barely functional through exertion and fear. Antonio didn't respond verbally, but his increased pace communicated understanding. We pushed beyond sustainable exertion, drawing on reserves fueled purely by survival instinct, the knowledge that our vehicle, our only realistic escape, waited at the trailhead provided marginal hope against overwhelming terror. The trail curved sharply rightward, temporarily obscuring our pursuers. We used this momentary advantage to accelerate further, ignoring burning lungs and straining muscles. When the path straightened again, I directed my headlamp backward, expecting to see our pursuers had gained significant ground. Instead, the trail behind us appeared empty. "They're gone," I managed between gasping breaths. Antonio slowed marginally but maintained an urgent pace. "That's impossible." Where movement registered peripherally, not behind but alongside our position. Our pursuers had abandoned the trail entirely, moving instead through the dense forest parallel to our route. This tactical adjustment suggested intelligence and familiarity with the terrain that transcended normal human capability. "They're flanking us," I realized aloud. We abandoned the trail ourselves, angling directly toward where our vehicle should be located according to GPS. This decision sacrificed established pathways for directional efficiency, a desperate gamble that the shortest route might provide our only survival chance. The forest underbrush clawed at our clothing and equipment as we forced our way through previously undisturbed vegetation. Branches scraped exposed skin, drawing blood that we registered only as additional sensation within an overwhelming flood of sensory input. Our pursuers adjusted to our course change with immediate precision, maintaining parallel tracking that suggested anticipation of our movements rather than reaction. Their coordination became increasingly evident, never crossing paths yet maintaining optimal positioning to prevent potential escape routes. The parking area materialized ahead, our headlamps finally illuminating the gravel clearing where our vehicle waited. Relief surged momentarily before transforming to renewed horror as we realized our tactical disadvantage. To reach the vehicle, we would need to cross approximately 30 yards of open ground, fully exposed to whatever tracked us from the forest perimeter. "We have to make a direct run for it," Antonio gasped, correctly assessing our limited options. "On three," I agreed, withdrawing the vehicle keys from my pocket. "1, 2, 3. We burst from the forest edge, abandoning stealth entirely in favor of maximum speed across the exposed clearing. Our headlamps created bobbing illumination that transformed the gravel surface into a disorienting landscape of shifting shadows. The vehicle seemed impossibly distant despite objectively close proximity. Risked a backward glance as we crossed the halfway point and observed our pursuers emerging from the tree line. Three distinct figures now clearly visible against the forest backdrop. Their movements remained uncannily fluid, yet in the relative openness of the parking area, they appeared unmistakably human rather than supernatural entities. This realization provided minimal comfort as they rapidly closed the distance between us. Their speed across open ground exceeded even our adrenaline-fueled pace. The nearest pursuer, taller than the others with distinctively broad shoulders, would intercept us before we reached the vehicle unless something changed immediately. "Split up," I shouted, veering sharply rightward while Antonio continued directly toward the vehicle. This improvised tactic achieved partial success. Two pursuers adjusted course to follow me while the third maintained focus on Antonio. This division improved his chances of reaching the vehicle while placing me in substantially greater danger, a trade-off I accepted without conscious deliberation. I circled toward the forest edge, intending to re-enter the woodland where their advantage seemed less pronounced. Before reaching the tree line, I altered course again, angling back toward the vehicle from a different approach vector. This erratic movement pattern temporarily confused my pursuers, creating a marginal lead that might prove sufficient. Antonio reached the vehicle several seconds before me, fumbling with the passenger door as I tossed him the keys. "Start the engine," I shouted, still 20 yards from safety. The vehicle's headlights blazed to life, illuminating the clearing with sudden brightness that revealed our pursuers with disturbing clarity. 3 individuals dressed entirely in black, their faces obscured by featureless masks that reflected the headlights with unnatural intensity. Their movements remained coordinated despite separation, maintaining optimal pursuit angles despite my evasive pattern. I reached the vehicle moments before the nearest pursuer would have intercepted me, yanking the driver's door open and throwing myself inside. Antonio slammed his door simultaneously, and I frantically engaged the central locking system as dark figures converged on our position. The nearest pursuer, the broad-shouldered individual, reached my window as the locks engaged. A gloved hand slammed against the glass with surprising force, producing a sound like a gunshot within the vehicle interior. Antonio and I recoiled instinctively, momentarily paralyzed by proximity to what had pursued us through darkness. "Drive," Antonio screamed, breaking my temporary immobility. I turned the ignition key with shaking hands, relief flooding through me as the engine roared to life. That relief evaporated instantly as warning lights illuminated across the dashboard, the tire pressure monitoring system indicating multiple failures simultaneously. "The tires," Antonio whispered, comprehension and horror mingling in his expression. I shifted into reverse despite this warning, intending to attempt escape regardless of vehicle condition. The car lurched backward awkwardly, the steering immediately compromised by deflated tires. After traveling approximately 10 feet, the vehicle became effectively immobilized, settling onto wheel rims that scraped ineffectually against the gravel surface. The realization of our situation descended with paralyzing clarity. We were effectively immobilized in a disabled vehicle, surrounded by individuals who had pursued us with evident malicious intent. The surrounding forest, already established as isolating under normal circumstances, now represented an impenetrable barrier between ourselves and potential assistance. Our pursuers maintained positions surrounding the vehicle, their dark forms clearly visible through windows and headlight illumination. The broad-shouldered figure positioned himself directly before the car, seemingly unconcerned about potential vehicular escape despite standing in our direct path. The 2 smaller figures circled to opposite sides, maintaining equidistant spacing with unsettling precision. "Check your phone," I instructed Antonio, my voice barely functional through constricted throat muscles. He withdrew his device with trembling hands. "No signal. GPS is still active but no cellular connection." I checked my own phone with identical results. We retained positioning capability but no communication functionality, useful for eventual location of our remains but useless for preventing their creation. The broad-shouldered figure approached the front of the vehicle with deliberate slowness, stopping directly before the headlights. With theatrical deliberation, he raised both hands to his face and removed the mask that had concealed his features. The revealed face defied immediate expectation, not monstrous or deformed, but distinctly human. Male, approximately 40 years old with unkempt beard and weathered complexion. Most distinctive were elaborate tattoos extending from his temples down his neck, intricate rose designs with twining stems that disappeared beneath his clothing collar. "What does he want?" Antonio whispered, instinctively shrinking away from the windshield despite our locked doors. The man smiled, a gesture somehow more terrifying than any threatening expression would have been. The pleasure evident in his features transmitted clear malevolence despite the superficially benign expression. He maintained eye contact with me specifically, his gaze communicating recognition, though I was certain we had never previously encountered each other. The smaller figures remained masked as they positioned themselves beside driver and passenger windows. The one nearest my position, noticeably smaller in stature than the others, placed both hands against the glass and leaned forward until their masked face nearly touched the window surface. Through that close proximity, I observed decorative elements I had previously missed. Glittering nail polish on the fingers pressed against my window, suggesting female identity beneath the concealing clothing. "They're going to break in," I stated, abandoning any pretense of optimism. Antonio frantically attempted to restart our emergency communication efforts, redialing emergency services despite consecutive failed attempts. "We need to do something," he repeated between dialing attempts. "We can't just wait for them to..." His statement remained unfinished as the broad-shouldered man abruptly moved from the front of the vehicle to join his companion at Antonio's window. Without warning or apparent effort, he slammed a closed fist against the passenger window with sufficient force to create a spiderweb of cracks across the safety glass. The sound reverberated through the vehicle interior with devastating psychological impact. The tangible evidence that our protective barrier could be breached transformed theoretical danger into immediate physical threat. Our pursuers were neither supernatural entities nor hallucinations. They were corporeal humans with evident capability and intent to harm us. The broad-shouldered man delivered a second impact to the already damaged window. The glass fracture pattern expanded, small fragments detaching from the matrix, while the overall structure maintained integrity. A third impact would likely breach the window entirely. "Try again," I instructed Antonio regarding emergency services, while frantically searching the vehicle interior for potential defensive implements. The glove compartment contained only vehicle documentation and basic maintenance supplies. Nothing that could function as effective weaponry against 3 determined attackers. The smaller figure at my window began methodically testing different sections of glass with fingertips, apparently seeking structural vulnerabilities. The precision of this examination suggested experience with vehicular break-ins, a disconcertingly professional approach to our situation. Antonio's phone suddenly emitted the distinctive sound of a connecting call. His expression transformed from despair to desperate hope as he activated the speaker function. "Hello, please help us. We're being attacked in Hargrove Forest parking area." The connection quality was poor, staticky, and intermittent, but an official-sounding voice responded with standard emergency protocols, requesting specific location details and situation assessment. Antonio provided information with frantic urgency while I maintained visual monitoring of our attackers. The broad-shouldered man tilted his head upon hearing the emergency call, his expression changing from sadistic pleasure to pragmatic assessment. He exchanged glances with his companions before stepping back from the vehicle slightly, not retreating but readjusting tactical approach in response to this development. "How long for response?" I shouted toward Antonio's phone, needing this critical information. The emergency operator's response was partially lost to static interference, but the time frame, approximately 20 minutes, emerged with sufficient clarity to register as effectively useless. Our vehicle windows would withstand perhaps another minute of determined assault before breaching. As though confirming this assessment, all 3 attackers simultaneously resumed their positions directly against the vehicle. The broad-shouldered man delivered another powerful impact to Antonio's window, expanding the fracture pattern significantly. His female companion maintained methodical testing of my window, while the third figure moved to the rear of the vehicle, disappearing from direct view. The emergency call disconnected abruptly. Whether due to signal failure or deliberate termination by our attackers remained unclear. Antonio attempted immediate reconnection without success. Our communication avenue had closed as suddenly as it had opened. "They're going to get in before help arrives," I stated unnecessarily, voicing the obvious to process our deteriorating situation. Antonio nodded, his expression transitioning from panic to grim resignation. "We need a weapon." We conducted another frantic search of the vehicle interior, knowing the futility even as we performed the actions. The most substantial items available were a tire pressure, gauge, and mechanical pencil, objects that might inflict minor injury but would provide no meaningful defense against determined attackers. The broad-shouldered man delivered another impact to Antonio's window, producing a distinctive sound that indicated imminent structural failure. Small fragments detached from the internal surface, falling into the vehicle interior like crystalline precipitation. The female attacker at my window abandoned her methodical assessment in favor of direct force, striking the glass with some implement that produced sharp, focused impacts. A sudden brightness illuminated the parking area, headlights approaching along the access road, accompanied by the distinctive sound of an engine. Our attackers froze momentarily, their coordinated assault interrupted by this unexpected development. The broad-shouldered man turned toward the approaching vehicle, maintaining his position beside our car while clearly assessing this new variable. The approaching vehicle gradually materialized from darkness, a Forest Service truck with official markings clearly visible on its doors. It approached steadily, headlights illuminating the entire parking area and our desperate situation. Our attackers exchanged glances before the broad-shouldered man gestured sharply with one hand. Without hesitation, all three figures abandoned their positions and sprinted toward the forest edge, disappearing into darkness with the same uncanny speed they had demonstrated during pursuit. The Forest Service truck pulled alongside our vehicle, its headlights providing welcome illumination against surrounding darkness. A uniformed ranger emerged cautiously, hand-positioned near what appeared to be a service weapon at his belt. "Are you folks all right?" he called, approaching our vehicle with evident concern. Relief overwhelmed coherent response temporarily. I managed to unlock and open my door despite trembling hands that barely maintained sufficient dexterity for the simple action. "They tried to attack us," I explained breathlessly as the ranger reached our position. "Who did?" he asked, scanning the surrounding area with professional vigilance. "Three people in masks," Antonio elaborated, exiting through his damaged window side. "They chased us through the forest and then damaged our car." The ranger radioed for backup immediately, providing concise situation details and our location coordinates. He then escorted us to his vehicle, establishing a defensive perimeter while awaiting additional support. "This isn't the first incident we've had recently," he explained once we were secured in his truck. "There's been reports of harassment and vandalism over the past few months. We've increased patrols but haven't managed to apprehend anyone yet." This information provided contextual framework for our experience but minimal comfort regarding its terrifying immediacy. The ranger maintained vigilant observation of our surroundings while additional enforcement personnel responded to his call. Local police arrived approximately 15 minutes after the ranger's initial contact, 3 patrol vehicles with emergency lights, illuminating the entire parking area in rhythmic blue and red flashes. Officers secured the perimeter while medical personnel evaluated our physical condition. Beyond superficial scratches and abrasions sustained during our forest flight, we had escaped serious physical injury. Antonio and I provided detailed statements to investigating officers, describing everything from our documentary project through the cave experiences to the subsequent pursuit and vehicle attack. The officers recorded our accounts professionally but with evident skepticism regarding certain elements, particularly our descriptions of the pursuers' movement patterns and coordination. "And you saw no identifying features beyond the rose tattoos on the one individual?" a detective asked while reviewing my statement. "Nothing definitive," I confirmed. The other 2 remained masked throughout the encounter. The detective nodded thoughtfully. "The tattoo description matches a suspect in several similar incidents. Jackson Mercer, local resident with multiple prior arrests for trespassing, harassment, and stalking, recently released from county detention after serving 14 months. This information provided partial explanation for our experience, confirmation that our pursuers were human malefactors rather than supernatural entities. Yet questions remained regarding their motivation and the specific targeting of our documentary project. "Do you think they were watching us all day?" Antonio asked, voicing the disturbing possibility we both considered. "Highly probable," the detective confirmed. "Mercer and his associates have established patterns of observing potential victims before engagement. They typically select isolated individuals they can intimidate without witnesses." "But why?" I pressed, needing comprehension beyond mere identification. "What do they gain from this?" The detective's expression reflected professional detachment mingled with personal distaste. Based on previous interrogations and psychological evaluations, Mercer derives satisfaction from creating fear. He's described the experience as collecting emotions from his victims. This explanation somehow increased the horror of our experience rather than diminishing it. The concept that our terror had been deliberately cultivated for another's pleasure represented violation beyond physical assault. Police technicians examined our vehicle, documenting the damage while searching for potential evidence. The tires had been systematically slashed, not haphazardly punctured, but deliberately cut along sidewalls to ensure maximum damage. This methodical approach suggested premeditation and experience rather than opportunistic vandalism. "We'll need to impound your vehicle for further processing," an evidence technician explained. "Standard procedure for cases involving physical evidence collection." We agreed without hesitation, arranging alternative transportation through the police department's victim services coordinator. Our immediate concern transcended property considerations, focusing instead on understanding what had occurred and preventing potential recurrence. The investigation continued throughout that night and subsequent days. Police officers accompanied us back to the forest the following morning to recover our abandoned equipment from the cave location. We approached that site with profound reluctance despite daylight conditions and armed escorts. The cave appeared mundane in morning light, merely a geological formation without the oppressive atmosphere we had experienced previously. Our equipment remained exactly where we had abandoned it, undisturbed by either human intervention or wildlife investigation. The officers documented the location thoroughly, collecting additional evidence while we retrieved our possessions. "There's indication of recent activity here," one officer observed, indicating disturbances in the cave floor sediment. Multiple individuals moving through this area within the past 24 hours. This confirmation of human presence provided rational framework for our experiences, but minimal comfort regarding their psychological impact. The knowledge that living humans had orchestrated our terror proved simultaneously reassuring and disturbing, establishing explicable causality while confirming deliberate malevolence. 3 days after the incident, police arrested Jackson Mercer, the broad-shouldered man with distinctive rose tattoos, during a systematic search operation throughout Hargrove Forest. His companions remained unidentified and at large despite extensive investigation efforts. Mercer refused cooperation with authorities, maintaining silence during formal questioning beyond a single disturbing statement. "I do this because I can," he reportedly told investigators during initial processing, "and because I want to." This explanation, devoid of complex motivation or mitigating circumstances, represented terrifying simplicity, evil without justification beyond personal gratification. The randomness of our selection as targets perhaps constituted the most disturbing aspect of the entire experience. The university granted Antonio and me academic accommodations following the incident, extending project deadlines and providing counseling resources for trauma processing. Professor Weber expressed profound concern upon learning what had transpired during our documentary filming. "The academic pursuit never justifies personal endangerment," he emphasized during our debriefing meeting. "I would have preferred an incomplete project to your experiencing such trauma." Despite his concerns, we decided to complete the documentary with substantial modifications to our original concept. Rather than debunking supernatural explanations for Hargrove Forest's reputation, we focused on examining how genuine human malevolence often underlies supposedly paranormal incidents. Our documentary incorporated police interview footage, with appropriate permissions and redactions, expert commentary from criminology professors, and historical analysis of similar incidents throughout the region. The project evolved from skeptical debunking to nuanced examination of how legitimate dangers become codified as supernatural legends. "People create monsters to process genuine threats," I narrated in our documentary conclusion. "The human mind converts random malevolence into supernatural frameworks because pattern and purpose, even malicious purpose, prove less terrifying than genuine randomness." The completed project received academic recognition and subsequently gained wider distribution through regional documentary festivals. Our experience transformed from isolated, traumatic incident to educational resource, providing cautionary perspective regarding wilderness exploration and investigative journalism safety protocols. 3 months after the incident, authorities apprehended one of Mercer's companions following an unrelated domestic disturbance. Kylie Westbrook, identified as the smaller pursuer with distinctive nail polish, provided limited cooperation with investigators in exchange for reduced charges. Her testimony confirmed several disturbing aspects of our experience while contextualizing others. According to Westbrook, Mercer and his associates regularly monitored Hargrove Forest for potential victims, typically selecting individuals they perceived as vulnerable or isolated. They utilized extensive knowledge of the forest terrain to coordinate harassment activities, communicating via encrypted radio devices while maintaining visual contact with targets. Jackson called it harvesting fear, Westbrook stated in her deposition. He believed intense emotional states created energy he could somehow absorb or collect. The rest of us just enjoyed the power trip of controlling other people's emotions. This explanation combined delusional thinking with sadistic pleasure, a disturbing synthesis that explained both the methodical nature of their actions and their apparent satisfaction in our terror. The third accomplice remained unidentified despite ongoing investigation efforts, potentially continuing similar activities without apprehension. Forest authorities implemented enhanced security measures following multiple documented incidents, including increased ranger patrols, surveillance camera installation at trailheads, and improved cellular communication infrastructure. These practical interventions addressed physical safety concerns while psychological impacts proved less amenable to systematic resolution. I.C. Continue experiencing periodic nightmares featuring pursuit through endless forest corridors, dreams where rational explanation dissolves into primal terror despite conscious recognition of their unreality. Antonio reports similar psychological aftereffects, particularly regarding cave environments and confined spaces. We maintain regular contact with investigating officers, receiving updates regarding case developments and security implementations. Jackson Mercer received a substantial prison sentence for multiple convictions including assault, criminal threatening, and property destruction. Psychological evaluations diagnosed several personality disorders characterized by sadistic tendencies and diminished empathy. Our documentary project, now titled Human Monsters: The Psychology of Manufactured Fear, continues circulation through academic and public education channels. We regularly receive correspondence from individuals describing similar experiences throughout various wilderness areas, suggesting patterns of predatory behavior extending beyond our isolated incident. The university established enhanced safety protocols for field research projects, requiring comprehensive risk assessments and communication plans for all off-campus activities. Our experience became incorporated into journalism and documentary filming curricula as cautionary case study regarding investigative boundaries and appropriate safety measures. I returned to Hargrove Forest once following the incident, accompanied by therapists specializing in exposure-based trauma treatment. The daylight forest appeared ordinary: trees, undergrowth, natural sounds without supernatural overtones. Yet even with professional support and rational understanding, uneasiness persisted throughout the controlled visit. This lasting impact perhaps represents the most significant damage inflicted by Mercer and his companions, the transformation of natural environment into psychological triggering space through deliberate terror cultivation. Their actions permanently altered my perception of woodland settings and isolated locations, imposing hypervigilance that resists rational dismissal. The forest itself remains neither haunted nor cursed in conventional supernatural understanding. The genuine horror lurking within Hargrove originated not from spectral entities or ancient curses, but from human consciousness, individuals who deliberately cultivated fear for personal gratification. This reality ultimately proves more disturbing than any supernatural explanation could provide. The legends surrounding Hargrove Forest continue circulating despite our documentary efforts and police interventions. Our experience has become incorporated into local folklore, another layer of cautionary mythology warning against forest exploration. The distinction between our documented human encounters and supposed supernatural manifestations blurs in retelling, demonstrating how genuine trauma transforms into mythological framework. Maintain scientific skepticism regarding paranormal phenomena while acknowledging newly discovered respect for instinctual responses to environmental warning signs. The forest knew something was wrong that day, not through supernatural awareness, but through subtle disruptions to normal patterns that registered subconsciously before achieving conscious recognition. Our documentary project succeeded in documenting horror, though not the variety we initially anticipated. We captured evidence not of supernatural entities, but of humanity's capacity for calculated cruelty, individuals who derive pleasure from manipulating others' emotional states through systematic terrorization. This knowledge provides coherent explanation without comforting resolution. Understanding the mechanisms behind our experience offers intellectual framework while emotional processing remains ongoing and incomplete. Some traumas resist neat conclusion despite comprehensive analysis. God alone knows how many similar predators operate undetected throughout isolated regions, deliberately cultivating fear while their actions become attributed to supernatural forces. This possibility represents the most disturbing aspect of our experience, the recognition that human monsters move among us, their deliberate malevolence misattributed to paranormal entities. The forest itself remains merely a forest, trees, undergrowth, geological formations without inherent malice. The true horror existed within human consciousness. Individuals who selected random victims for systematic terrorization based solely on opportunity and personal gratification. This reality ultimately proves more disturbing than any supernatural explanation. Ghosts and demons, if they existed, might operate according to comprehensible rules and limitations. Human predators who derive pleasure from others' fear follow no predictable patterns beyond opportunity and impulse, making them simultaneously more explicable and more terrifying than any paranormal entity could ever be.